I do believe, create mutual understanding and goodwill amongst the cultures of the world. I've seen that just recently in a trip I was fortunate enough to take to Shanghai. Okay, the first thing I show you, of course, is not a medal, right? It's a coin, it's a circulating coin. Why? A friend of mine a number of years ago said, "Hey, Joel, I love anagrams, and coin is an anagram of icon." So I just thought, that's a very, very interesting thing when you contemplate something like the Lincoln cent, which is an iconic coin, most reproduced object of art. It's not hyperbole, as far as I know, in the entire world, in human history, including the Mona Lisa, the Sistine ceiling, and the pyramids at Giza, whatever. Billions and billions of this piece of artwork has been reproduced and circulating since 1909. Growing up as a kid in the Bronx, we saw this image, Victor David Brenner's image of Lincoln, over and over and over and over again in the street games we played, and it was our form of currency as children. It was pennies that we were able to collect. If we were lucky enough to earn a dime, that was a bonanza. Second piece of artwork I'm showing you, yes, I know it's not a medal, but it has to do with medals. It has to do with the story of medals. It has to do with the intricate interconnection. And that's one of the messages I have for you, not that you haven't heard it or have heard it from my lips. I really truly believe that besides being a wonderful, humane interconnection of culture, that everything is connected. And when I've done my research for any given project, that really comes home. So I'm sure most people here know exactly what I was trying to portray here. On a summer afternoon, medalist Victor David Brenner was invited to the summer White House in Oyster Bay, New York, on Long Island, by Theodore Roosevelt. In the absence of St. Gaudens, who, of course, Roosevelt championed as someone who would bring luster and grand beauty, the grand beauty of Europe and France and other great societies that produced art medals, invited Victor David Brenner, a Lithuanian immigrant, who is a medalist and die maker from the Lower East Side of New York, to Oyster Bay to a lunch. This little article in the New York Times. He's on the guest list. He goes into the library to sketch TR for the Panama Service Canal Medal, which his portrait appears on the obverse. And Brenner, being a freelancer like myself, has the good sense to bring along his plaque, one of his plaques, of the 16th president, whom we revered and loved, as many did, of course. At this moment, which I call the inspiration of the Lincoln cent, at this moment, these two men, this unlikely meeting of American royalty and a Lithuanian sculptor, artist, conspire to break a precedent that was firmly set by the first president of our nation, George Washington, in great wisdom, said, "Don't put my portrait on our coinage," to Hamilton and the rest. He said, "You'll make me a sovereign. And in this new experiment we're trying to put together here called America, you'd make me a king. You'd make me a sovereign, and it's the people who are sovereign." I was very moved by that. Yet, fast forward a number of years in the history of our country, and these two gentlemen out in Oyster Bay, Long Island, saw fit to put Abraham Lincoln on the penny, on the cent, American cent. There's Brenner. Again, this is under the general umbrella of everything is connected. It's kind of quite astonishing. Here's an early, or maybe one of the very first people from the New York Numismatic Club could correct me, This is Keene's Chop House in New York City, where President Frank Higgins and the erudite members of the New York Numismatic Club met. And here we have Brenner at that meeting. Fast forward a mere 100 years later, and Dr. David Menchel and the Bronx Coin Club gets a hold of this guy who grew up in the Bronx and says, look, we have, this is our thousandth meeting. We want to honor our longstanding loyalty of our coin club. And we'd like you to design a medal, which I did. I apologize, I don't have that image. It was of Jonas Bronk. And here we are sitting with Dr. Menchel and now I'm forgetting his name.
Jay Golds.
And Jay Golds, Dr. Jay Golds, and Norman, the members of the Bronx Coin Club at Keene's Restaurant. So this is the kind of stuff that kind of really, reverberates. It has a lot of resonance to me that 100 years later, I'm sitting in the same restaurant as VDB. VDB also designs the presidential medal of Mr. Higgins for the first New York Numismatic Club presidential medal. 1908, I guess he was working on it. It probably made its appearance with the way things go in 1910. And again, fast forward 100 years, and I'm commissioned by the New York Numismatic Club to do a portrait of Jerry Haggerty, the 45th president of the New York Numismatic Club. On top of that, I'm simultaneously working on way too many philatelic issues to mention, literally everything under the sun and beyond. And of course, one of those topics are the many, many, many historical resonant aspects of the 16th president's life and work. One of them, I've just included this one because it relates to a medal that I'll show you in a moment. This was his famous speech at Cooper Union, which Lincoln himself said it was Brady, Matthew Brady, and Cooper Union that made me president. And he knew what he was speaking of because Brady took an iconic portrait of him that made him look presidential. And his lawyerly speech at the Cooper Union, when the pick and flower of all of New York society and the intelligentsia were present, certainly turned the tide in his presidential campaign. 100 years later, in 2009, the United States Mint issues the bicentennial Lincoln Cents with brand new reverse designs. A long, tortuous story that one day I will get into with you on a personal basis, if you ever ask me. And at the end of that incredible journey, my design, and it is a complex process, the selection process for design. In this case, it was extremely complex for obvious reasons. My portrait of the third aspect is the unbearded lawyer in Springfield, Illinois. I depicted him orating. Hopefully someone would, the viewer would understand that to mean perhaps his House Divided speech in front of the old State House. A little aside, a historical aside for those of you who love history, the old State House stands there today. It stands there today because of one man, an architect in Springfield, Illinois. He's been gone a few years, but we became bosom buddies because he not only when they threatened to take down the State House where Lincoln ran his presidential campaign from, and many other historical aspects relate to that edifice, they were going to make a parking lot. And he was an architect from Chicago who was living in Springfield, and he said, no, you're not going to do that. If you want a parking lot, I'll take that building brick by brick and move it off site. And I'll build a parking lot for you underneath it. And then I'll restore that to the glory of its looks when Lincoln and Herndon had their law offices catty corner across the street. So I had to select that State House as a background for Lincoln the orator. And of course it relates to the fact that 100 years later, I'm on the other side of Victor David Brenner's, where my artwork is. On the other side, on the reverse of Lincoln, the Lincoln Cent and Victor David Brenner's work. There were 4 that year. The centennial year was one for each state that was associated with Lincoln. Log cabin birth years in Kentucky, years as a maxman and frontiersman, so to speak, in Indiana, his professional years in Illinois, and his presidential years in D.C., in Washington, D.C. You'll notice, of course, in Susan Gamble's rendition of the Capitol, it's missing its dome and the Statue of Freedom that is above it. And I point that out because a little bit later on, that'll play into another medal that, or actually a plaque that I had designed. This is another commission from the New York Numismatic Club. Again, the theme here is I can't get away from the 16th president, no matter what I want to. There are other themes I can't get away from, you'll see in a few moments. I can't get away from aviation, aerospace, and space exploration. I've been involved with NASA. I've been involved in a very major way with the United States Air Force Art Program, and got experiences and learned things in a very, very concrete way that are actually a treasure, invaluable in terms of how they inform your art. And they showed up in many medals, especially some of the Congressional Gold medals I was honored to have selected for these great heroes. So the little story here, when I was researching the saddle that was on the horse that the Army provided for Lincoln, because old Bob was not going to be transported to the Wills Mansion for the processional ride from Dr. Wills' home to Gettysburg, where he delivered his famous address. He's on this beautiful bay mare. I read in the Philadelphia Inquirer some 70 years later that a little girl was with her sisters and her aunt, and they were along the line of the processional of the dignitaries going to the cemetery. And Lincoln towered above everybody, especially with the stovepipe hat. And a little girl who, as a 92-year-old, I think I read, correct me if I have any of this minutia wrong, I was very impressed. This 92-year-old woman in an interview said, I remember when I was 5, the president marched along with the others, and he towered above everybody. And when he passed us, he doffed his cap to the ladies. She was standing with a group of ladies. And I thought, what a gesture. What a human moment of, the man of this kind of character and presence. So that's why I have Lincoln in that particular posture. I have to owe the lower inscription on the exurge to a past president of the New York Numismatic Club, Constantine Maunescu, who I believe hand-selected that quote, that these dead shall not have died in vain. This is the actual medal sculpted by Luigi Badia. This goes back to the Cooper Union speech. I'll just tell you briefly that I labored, and everyone in the audience is an individual. It's not a crowd. It's not a bunch of extras. Everyone who had a seat the night that Lincoln spoke at the Cooper Union, it was a coveted seat. They had a reason to be there, and the speech, as Lincoln himself said, turned the tide in his presidential campaign. William Cullen Bryant, there was, as I say, the pick and flower of New York. Fast forward, this was my attempt at the first inaugural, in which his first inaugural address, of course, had such poetic words, which he himself labored over. The mystic chords of memory is what's invoked on the reverse, and of course, the mourning angel for the graves of soldiers. I wound up getting invited back to Springfield. I should have mentioned to you that architect in Springfield, Illinois, invited myself and my wife down to Springfield when the 44th president, newly inaugurated in 2009, Barack Obama, was to speak to the American Abraham Lincoln Association. So we were invited down there, and I got to meet a brand new minted president twice, actually, before he spoke and after he spoke. And of course, what was the nature of his speech? It was the relevance of Lincoln in today's world. And it was an incredibly well-delivered one as well. So in 2015, I was invited down. I was invited to create a medal honoring the funeral, which actually they made a replica of the railroad, of the funeral train. They conducted the route from D.C. all the way through New York and back to Oakland Cemetery in Springfield, where he's interred. This is just a quarter design for the America the Beautiful program. And I put it in because it connects back to Roosevelt sitting in Long Island and Brenner. Again, everything to me seems miraculously connected. This, of course, indicates that this man, among a larger-than-life figure in so many different ways, found himself out in the Badlands of North Dakota after, I found in my research, after on Valentine's Day, he lost both his mother and his new bride, his young bride. And this was a part of his healing process, and because of it, we have precious lands because of his encounters with John Muir and his reverence for nature. And it was sculpted by Phoebe Hempel, and of course they've made 5-ounce versions of this, which are essentially medals. That's why I included it. So I've repeated it, I reiterate it once again, everything is connected, and I'll go through these very quickly. This is just kind of background, a little color background, no pun intended, or maybe pun intended. I've done a lot of stamp designs, so I got a grounding in making sure I got my research right, because if you got the tuft of hair on a golden langur wrong, or if you created an image that showed him in a field, and he's really an arboreal animal, you'll hear from someone, in Geneva somewhere at the World Wildlife Foundation. The scientists will get a hold of you and say, hey, look, that's incorrect. So it was a good training for trying to pay attention to whatever I was learning in my historical background. The United States Air Force Art Program, many, many, many years, a wonderful, wonderful deal, a treasure beyond anything monetary. Pro bono program, artists with a long tradition going back to the fields of the Civil War, where Winslow Homer chronicled the events for the military. And through World War I, World War II, artists these days, and up until very recently when funds seem to have shrunk, for a painting documenting an Air Force mission, which very often involved more than just the Air Force. It involved a deep, deep history. In this case, it was the 75th the 50th anniversary of World War II. Took me to China with men like Arthur. I don't remember his surname, but he told me that he was under secret orders to train the Chinese. This gentleman was with Merrill's Marauders in India and Burma. All the people portrayed in this painting in full color were living and on board with the two artists that accompanied this trip. So it gave me a great sense of history, what World War II is about. This was done for a trip through the Air Force, which chronicled a lot of the technologies, cutting-edge technologies at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And it was my chance to address the dream of flight, which we seem to take for granted today. We even take for granted that we've been to the moon and back. And one thing I learned from my time at NASA, it's a dangerous, complex enterprise. I was deeply impressed by what we did. We remember that, but everything we did up until that. With the Air Force, I traveled to Normandy. I got a chance firsthand, not secondary, but firsthand, to see how the people of the Cotentin Peninsula still, each and every year, remember and appreciate the sacrifice of the Allies. And it's incredibly moving because it brings the history to to a fever pitch of reality if you're going to say something authentic about it. Every year, women and children in the little towns along the Normandy beaches and in the interior dress up in 40s clothing. There are multinational ceremonies, mostly between the French and the Americans. Very, very moving. And that winds up getting into what I do as an artist and what I do as a medallic artist. This was a private sector painting of a group of individuals nicknamed the Filthy 13, who were among the first of pre-dawn suicide jump into the beaches of Normandy. There were demolition saboteurs. I got to meet some of these men. They're all gone now. Just this October, the master sergeant who accompanied the two artists that were in Normandy calls me up and says, "Joel, we've got a C-47 that carried British and American troopers, okay?" And it was after its years as a warbird was languishing. It did some service, some medevac service. Then it was a crop duster or something. And it was just, decaying in a field somewhere, sinking into the mud. And a gentleman named Ed Franco and a crew of Italian engineers and aviation specialists resurrected the plane, and they said, "We're ready for some nose art, Joel, and you're the guy to do it." I said, I don't do nose art. I don't paint on fuselages. I come on down, you're the guy to do it. I found myself up on a scaffold in the warm Floridian sun, painting a sexy 1940s era nose art on a C-47. This is the actual plane. And it was such a kind of I loved it because it was an adventure. I said, "Do you have something I could use as a palette?" It was in a hangar area there. There was I said, "Just a piece of wood, a piece of glass." And Ed hands me a window of the plane that I use as my palette. So I was really contacting history. I was painting on the actual plane that carried the 6th Regiment of British and American paratroopers. Done a lot of work for the United States Mint, as Schuyler mentioned, a lot of coins, and a number of medals. Most moving to me, I guess, has to be the Congressional Gold Medals that I was assigned to design and turned out to be selected. Each and every one, again, an unbelievable story. Well, before I do, just connecting up with Lincoln and Brenner, of course, an ATB quarter. Of course, it's Gettysburg and the 72nd at the 72nd infantry at the battle line, at Cemetery Ridge, where Lincoln gave his address. I only put this in. This is strictly an artist putting in something that I kind of like because I'm thought of as a very, very figurative, kind of old-fashioned, narrative artist, and I'm not so modern, for the reverse of Bess Truman's first spouse, I said, and I did versions where I showed the railroad trains of the era on their whistle-stop tour for the Truman campaign back in 48. And then I thought of, in the movies sometimes, when someone's making a great tour. In the old black and white movies, they'll show the wheels of the train. I said, you know, the wheels of the train have all that wonderful metal, all those different levels of textures of metal. And I thought metalists would love that. I'm going to do that. And actually, the first Spouse series, when you remove the monetized inscriptions and the inscriptions that make it a coin, they're also issued as metal. So this part inside is a metal, actually. That's an in-house mock-up of what it looks like. I wish I had a shot of the actual metal itself. Again, another caveat, MTAR, it's not a metal, but why am I putting it in my little presentation to you? Because this Frenchman, as a young boy, playing with his father's tools, injured his eye and got an infection which ruined his eyesight. And so Braille was a man who was blind physically, he had darkness, but he had enlightenment and vision, because he wound up creating the Braille system, which allowed people who were blind to be literate. I'll come back to Braille in a moment. This was the first Congressional Gold Medal I ever had selected. It was a women's Air Force service pilots. Meeting these women in DC at the ceremony was one of the highlights of my life. And a little secret behind the reason for this selection, I will guarantee it to you, is not only that hopefully I got the era woman right, who's not only feminine but courageous. These women flew experimental crafts that the test pilots were afraid to get into. Crafts nicknamed Widowmaker. They loved flight so much. They loved their adventure, and they were competent and wonderful and heroic. And meeting these women in their 80s who still fit into their original uniforms was quite a treat. But because I sat in the cockpits of many, many U.S. Air Force craft around the globe, I know that the pilots, they love to have all these pockets in their pants where they keep their navigation maps and stuff and all kinds of stuff. And I got some feedback on this little detail that was probably in none of the other candidates for this Congressional Gold Medal. It's a detail, it's minutia, but it's part of the reason why direct experience with history is something that plays out in your artwork in the end. This is the sculpt, the final medal, again, sculpted by Phoebe Hempels. And I hope that people could get the enthusiasm as these women are walking on the tarmac, to their 8 T6s. I hope without reading the inscriptions, you'd be able to recognize these gentlemen. Schuyler mentioned them earlier. I wouldn't have come up with this design if I didn't spend time down at NASA. I wouldn't have come up with this design if I didn't spend time with the Air Force and at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I got a chance to meet each of these gentlemen, one of them the first Earthling to walk on another planetary body. And by the way, I have to say something about Neil Armstrong. I happened to have had the great good fortune to be in the rotunda of the Capitol when these men received their Congressional Gold Medal. And if you ever get a chance, Google up New Frontier Congressional Gold Medal Ceremony. It's on C-SPAN, maybe on YouTube. Neil Armstrong's speech was a gem of history. I mean, these men were not just, test pilots and kind of, like athletes or something like that who risked, life and limb to do this. They were engineers. They were sophisticated and, highly, highly competent, intelligent people. Neil Armstrong's speech connecting the Wright brothers and pointing to the rotunda frieze, the Trompe-l'oeil frieze of American history in the rotunda of the Capitol. Near the end of that frieze, the brothers Wright with a Wright flyer and a bald eagle, and mention why, we called our lunar lander the eagle is landed. The eagle is landed. The reverse. I'll tell you about the reverse. The reverse is sculpted by Don Everhart, who was lead sculptor. at the Mint at the time. He's retired now. And the arborist was Phoebe Hemphill again. I should mention that. And this is in the rotunda of the Capitol. Before we left, someone took a picture of me, and again, connecting things up behind the blow-ups of the Congressional Gold Medals, a moment of real pride, as you could well imagine in my life. This kid from the Bronx, who could draw well, is standing in the rotunda of the Capitol, the inner sanctum sanctorum of our democracy. They were contemplating interring George Washington there. And behind the blow-ups are John Trumbull's murals. Trumbull laid down, he was quite an accomplished artist and painter, he laid down his brush to be George Washington's aide-de-camp. I mention that tidbit because, again, everything is connected, because when I've mentioned to people I'm going on an Air Force trip. Air Force art? What? What are you talking about? Well, that's what I'm talking about. I did many Congressional Gold Medals that were selected for the Code Talkers. I'm only showing you one. This is the Seminole Code Talkers. And although there's a lot of story being told through pictorial or figurative art, I admit it, there's also some symbolic stuff going on here, which has to do with research. If you go a little bit more deeply into the lore and culture of the Seminole, they have pictographs and images that are very meaningful. And one of them is very much like this, where there are waving lines that suggest fluidity and communication. And these code talkers were instrumental in getting communications that were unable to be deciphered by the enemy. Sculpted again by Phoebe Hemphill. All right, New York, 9/11. Our world was turned upside down that day. I wasn't on this one, not one size fits all. On this one, I wasn't about to be drawing planes and bodies falling or something like that. It was all too horrible. It was all too real, as surreal as that day was. So I have lines going down symbolizing the loss. And I have lines rising up symbolizing that we will rebuild. This is America. I also have, if this face of the obverse were an analog clock, remember analog clocks? Each of the numbers relates to the flights, and they're placed at the time that that manifest. The people aboard would have met their fates, Flight 93 to 77, at the exact times. I had an artist friend of mine say, "Joel, you're such a realistic kind of figurative guy. I didn't know you had that in you." Of course I have that in me. That's what I do when I do figurative art. I make a construction, but as an artist, I want to have my construction hold something. I want it to hold some history. I want it to hold some human content, something that brings us to some awareness or edification. Sculpted by Jim LeCaretz, the 9/11 medal. I put this one in because this was one of those episodes of World War II that was little known to me and probably little known to many people before George Clooney made the movie, and before I read about all this business about how Eisenhower, a 5-star general and the brains and behind the D-Day invasion, the consummate military leader, he saw fit to make sure that the treasures of Europe would be saved. The Nazis were taking literally everything. They were taking not only art and sculpture, they were taking gold, but mostly it was the art. And they were secreting it. And the thing that really grabbed me very deeply was a man who just died a year or so ago, Harry Ettlinger, from New Jersey, born in Germany, spoke fluent German, left Europe and with his family, found sanctuary here, wound up enlisting in the United States Army, wound up in the Monuments Men. And he was very instrumental in having located a lot of these places that were mines and caves where the Nazis very, very, very systematically secreted the great treasures of the world. I mean, we're talking about the Ghent altarpiece and, Vermeers and Rembrandts. Anyway, Harry Ettlinger told me after he received the Congressional Gold Medal, he said, what was so chilling to me was that when we were in the caves, they were climatically controlled, okay, to preserve the artwork. When he told me that, I'm getting chills right now, to preserve the artwork, to preserve the world's treasures for themselves. And I thought, this man, a witness who was an active participant in this piece of history, is telling me what evil is. I was born in 1946, so, all of it is secondary to me. But this man was a witness, and I thought that was evil. The last Congressional Gold Medal I've done, there's many others, but I put it in because it's the last, was for the Filipino veterans of World War II, an enormous story. And the little vignette in the exurge here is of a soldier guarding the rear, which was very important, but the story's too complex, I won't get into it. Beautiful job of sculpting by Phoebe again. And now I'll go through these at a very quick pace because I want to leave a minute or two for some questions and answers. Should you have any, if you're still conscious after this? Okay. So New York Numismatic Club, Constantine, the fellow who had the quote on the Civil War medal, with of course something that has to do with him, not just a straight portrait, but his. Mark Anderson will be able to pronounce it for me. The Lysimachus medals are his specialty. And then the New York Numismatic Club commemorated the 50th and the 75th anniversary of the World's Fairs in New York, 39, out in Queens, and of course the 64, which I saw the Michelangelo. I was a high school kid or something, yeah. And so I had to put Michelangelo, and the Pietà, and of course it was, and Eugene Dobb and I talked about it because he had the fun one, 1939, where you get these wonderful Raymond Loewy, wonderful, that wonderful old locomotives. So we talked about, having them talk to each other, the Unisphere and Perisphere and Trilon, and this business relating to that business, and it's encased in a pretty brilliant holder, shall I say, designed by Mashiko. This is the last commission I have from New York Numismatic Club, and it shows the return of the doughboys or the soldiers through the arch that no longer is there anymore, unfortunately, in New York, Madison Square. Mark, was the arch Madison Square? Is that what it was?
Yeah.
It was Madison Square.
Yeah.
And the arch itself, beautifully rendered by Luigi Badia from my design. The arch itself told such a beautiful story, that triumphant arch. Too bad it went. Did a lot for the American Numismatic Club, the Presidential Award Medal. I put this in because I'm going to go over and see the young folks, and so I had to put that in. I've never seen this medal. I've never seen a facsimile. All I have is these drawings. Florence Shook, a towering figure in the world of young numismatist. And I did the Elvira Klein Stefanelli Memorial Award. There's a lot of kind of antique lore and history in what I was trying to say there. I won't get into it with you now, nor could I get through it, and I won't put you through it. But I was happy with the way this worked out. And Mr. Alex Stefanelli was very, very, very pleased. And I was very happy about that before he left us. Quite a woman, Elvira Kane Stefanelli. I'm sure you know her. I just got done with a series of World War I medals. They might also be, I think it's a double kind of issue. I think they're going to be monetized as coins and as crowns, but I think there was also going to be separate medals without a monetary value. And the idea here was that victory was not, a triumphant victory. This was a mournful victory. This was a victory that was empathetic and a protective victory. And here she is, of course, with a dying soldier, one who might have passed, theoretically looking up to where he's bound. And of course, the poppy fields. All based on the inscriptions, by the way, based on the famous poem, Flanders Fields. I just got through with this. This is the same plane, the C-47, that I saw so many times with the Air Force, and I wound up painting on the fuselage on it. And this June, I do believe, if I can convince my wife, we'll be going to France and to Normandy again. Of course, that plane that is being finished, that I painted in nose art, is going to be part of the fleet and a commemorative flight to Normandy. So I'll get to kind of revisit all that again. Mel Wax, a prominent numismatist, asked me, this is very recent, I haven't seen the medal yet, Mickey Marcus, David Mickey Marcus, a great hero in the state of Israel, the only individual to be interred at West Point, who fought under the flags of two separate nations. Ben Gurion said he was simply the best we had, the best man we had. Again, coming up now is the anniversary of the moon landing, Apollo 11. This is a recent one. I wanted it to be bimetallic, as you could see. Unfortunately, it's going to be one metal. It's going to be silver, but that's my design for that. Just got through doing World War I and a special acknowledgement of Sergeant Alton York, who York Avenue is named after. I lived in New York all my life. I had no idea that York Avenue was not named after the Duke of York or something. It was named after Sergeant Alvin York, from a pacifist who turned out to be a great hero in the fields of France and Argonne. The back is about the women's role, spearheaded by Liberty, of course, but at home, there was a lot of front going on. The women's suffrage movement, and on the fields, the whole Red Cross movement, spearheaded by women, and women actually wound up serving. This is the next to last one. I just got invited in the beginning of December to Shanghai, and I put this in as a precedent breaker. It's Liberty and Britannia kind of exchanging greetings across the ocean, because there's such a rich history of our special relationship. They're attended by the secondary symbols of the lion and the American eagle. This was a coin and also, I think, a non-monetized medal. I can't track them all down. Mel Wax invited me to design the American half of the Journey for Peace medal that commemorated the journey 40 years before 2009, when Kissinger and Nixon made their epic visit to China, began a whole era of openness. And I met the man who I collaborated with, Mr. Lau Young Hui, who did the Mao, the Chinese part. I did the Western part. And as medalists, if you've ever seen this, I was astonished. Another part of the Chinese team took the yin-yang, which are perfect meshing of two opposites to make one whole, but they also did it in 3 dimensions, where on the Chinese side, the dragon is in relief, and the American eagle is in puce, and it's reversed, and they fit together. So there are 2 obverses, and the 2 reverses are hidden inside. And this is the very last thing I did. Saint Anne and baby Jesus, and of course symbolically a lamb taking note, and the sun being used as kind of a halo or religious aspect. And I thank you for being present and sitting through my little stories and sharing these pictures with you. Thank you so much.
Anyone have any questions for Joel before we conclude?
How much input do you have after you turn over the drawing with the sculpture?
Varies with each and every situation. When it was for a governmental entity, such as the British or the United States Mint, mostly that's done in-house, and there's some communication, not a lot. In the private sector, I work, like this with Luigi Badia and other sculptors, well, Eugene, so it's a very varied scenario.
Anything else?
I know you said the process is complex, and I don't want you to get deeply into it, but from the moment that you're given the commission to the point at which the medal is released or the coin is released, working with the federal government, how long would you say that is?
Just off the bat, of course, it'll vary. I'll say 3 months. Oh, and sometimes that might be until the actual entity, the coin or medal, is released into the public from getting the... Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. 3 months of work on my end, then you could wait 7. You could wait a year, sometimes more, before, the brand new thing that you forgot about comes out. Yes?
I'm curious about, with older medals, there's always this distinction about people being depicted when they lived versus when they kind of died, and it's a memorial thing, commemorative thing. I'm just wondering whether you take more time to work on the portraits of living persons, because they can complain and everything, and people can say, oh gee, he isn't like me. Like, I believe it happened a lot with Soldani, a very famous Florentine medalist, who would get those complaints, the Grand Duke would write back to him, well, you know what, we've got your medal. Nobody, if not for the inscription, would never have recognized who that was. So I'm just curious, with the dead people, it probably is easier. So whether you find that it takes longer for you to work on portraits of living people.
And it varies with your reference. If you have good reference, the good thing about people who are not with us any longer, they don't move. Okay, so you have your reference in that sense, and yes, they don't complain. Maybe the client will complain, but I once did some etchings for a gallery owner when I was a very young, innocent fellow, and he said to me, he said, Joel, you know who my favorite artists are? And I said, no. I thought he'd say, Monet or Rembrandt. He said, no. My favorite artists are dead artists. And I was like shaken by that, dead artists? What? He said, don't you want to know why, Joel? He said. I said, okay, why? He said, because they can't make any more pictures. Well, I guess the best subjects of portraits would be, I'm going to use that then, are people who are no longer with us, because it limits the amount of complaints about, John Singer Sargent, a great, great portrait artist. His working definition of a portrait was, a portrait is a painting with a little something wrong about the nose.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.